Hey everyone, William Strife here, and this particular video is about some of the games that were shown at E3 last week. Lots of really interesting tech and new IP came out of this year's exposé. Before I get to the games though, I'm going to recap a few things I said earlier this week, just in case you didn't hear about it yet. The biggest thing that happened to me recently is I canceled my show, Elements of Play. It wasn't something I just suddenly decided to do either. I made the choice after weeks of thinking it over. As for the reason, Machinima had a different idea for the show's direction and production. If the terms of the contract were different, I probably would have accommodated them, but when I signed the contract for the show, given the terms, which I'm not at liberty to disclose, I made a personal decision not to make concessions. Anyways, that's the news on my part. My show is over, and Machinima doesn't care about the leftover episodes. Thus, any remaining content will surface here over the next few weeks. Also, in the last video where I announced this, I asked for all of you to bring up games and whatnot from E3 that you want to hear my opinion on. Feel free to use the links you see right now to jump to the games you want to hear about the most, but without further ado, let's get to it. But before I get to any of the actual games that showed up at E3, I'm going to bring up one thing about E3 that completely baffled me. Rockstar Games. Where on earth were they? I mean, maybe I haven't looked deep enough, maybe I just didn't see anything from them, but to the extent of my knowledge, Rockstar was entirely absent from E3 this year, which, is really, really surprising. At the very least, I was hoping to hear news on Grand Theft Auto 5 and whatever else they're working on. It really makes me worried that they didn't show up. It makes me wonder whether or not they're struggling. Maybe they've got some trouble maybe they're in some sort of trouble in one way or another, financial or otherwise. Obviously, that's just speculation on my part. I have no earthly idea what could have held them back from showing up at E3. I haven't looked into anything. But I'm very much so disappointed to have not seen any Rockstar IP at the show. Hopefully that's not a sign of anything bad. Maybe they're actually building up for a really, really good E3 next year in 2013. But as it stands, I'm very concerned over the fact that Rockstar had no presence, as far as I know, at E3, which is the largest electronic trade show for the video game industry, period. Okay, now on to the actual games that were shown at E3 and the titles that most of you wanted me to speak on, and a few of my personal favorites. Keep in mind, I'm not going to talk about all the games that you want to hear about. Most of these titles are from Ubisoft because they basically cleaned the entire show. They had the best tech, the best games. I really don't see anybody coming close to how well Ubisoft did this year at E3. But anyway, the first game that I think I'm going to bring up, and keep in mind that these games aren't in any particular order of favoritism, but Dishonored is the first game that I'm going to talk about, and I don't know, there's not a whole lot to say about this game, mainly because it's so close to being released that Arcane Studios has done a very good job of getting some hype up and awareness about the game altogether. Usually, the games that make a big splash at E3, in my opinion, are the titles where you've never heard of them before, or you've only seen a tiny bit of them, and E3 is that time whenever you get to see big, large amounts of footage and trailers and explanations about how the game plays. As far as Dishonored goes, on the other hand, I think that they've done a really good job of explaining what the game is and showing it off before E3. So as a result, I didn't get a whole lot of anything out of what I saw of Dishonored at E3 this year. But at the same time, I learned a couple of things. First of all, the game is not going to be open world. It's not going to be... You won't have an option to freely run around a city or anything, which really makes sense if you look at the game Dark Messiah, Heroes of Might and Magic from Arcane Studios. That was released back in 2006, I think. It was a first-person game, but it was more or less a linear experience. And, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a big problem. But I would like to have some freedom, or at least as much freedom as you get in Bioshock levels, as it were, because... having to be stuck to linear pathing and whatnot, that's really, really boring. It's against what I am interested in games. I like the options and the choice, and they definitely demonstrated that in their E3 demos that they showed, and the developer walkthroughs and whatnot. There was a particular instance where the mission was to break into a hotel or some sort of a gambling establishment and kill someone who was up on the top floor. I think the developer said there were about 10, maybe 12 different ways to get into the building, which, that's what I'm looking for. It's a lot of choice, but at the exact same time, if I don't have an option to, run around an area on my own, of my own accord, I'm not as interested in it. But it still looks interesting. I'm going to play it. Obviously, it's got my attention. Whether or not I'll like it is another story, because as it stands, I'm wondering whether or not it's going to be too restrictive for my tastes. But those are my opinions on Dishonored. Next up is Assassin's Creed 3. For those of you who have listened to my previous podcasts, and anybody who doesn't know what my podcasts are, you're watching/listening to one right now. Previous episodes, they're called Heads Up. But anyway, this next game is Assassin's Creed 3. And any of you who follow my blog or listen to what I have to say in my previous podcasts should know that I'm a pretty big Assassin's Creed fan. I've been playing the game since the first release. Assassin's Creed 3, I'm really amazed. It looks better. I wasn't expecting them to really do a whole lot more with the engine or go in a new direction the way they have. But, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a really great series. But the number one thing that I am hoping from Assassin's Creed 3 is that it is the end of the Assassin's Creed series. Because, like it or not, I'm getting tired of the franchise. I am suffering franchise fatigue from it. I think that they've stretched it out a little bit too far as it is, turning it into a yearly experience. And I really do want to see Desmond's story culminate very soon, because otherwise, I don't know that I'm going to care about how it ends, because otherwise it's just going to be Ubisoft trying to pump as much money out of the series as they possibly can, and ending up with a lackluster ending because they just don't know how to end it when they should. Of course, that's just my view in the long run about the Assassin's Creed series. As far as Assassin's Creed 3 looks, it looks better. I really like the idea of running around in the wilderness, in the mountains and whatnot. Naturally, for me, as an American, it's a pretty big deal to finally see the series come to the United States, especially for it to take place during such a pivotal point in the history of the United States of America, the Revolutionary War. And obviously, I know my history for the United States a whole lot better than any of the history pertaining to the world, as far as the Crusades and the Renaissance go. So naturally, I'll be able to see how they're layering in their fictional story between the facts of history a whole lot better with this new installment. Another thing that I'm really looking forward to with Assassin's Creed 3 are the naval battles. They had a demo of you taking the helm of a ship and taking out other British vessels on the high seas. It definitely looked awesome, if not unrealistic. The way that the ship was moving around was just way too responsive. But Assassin's Creed 3, definitely looking forward to it. Looks a whole lot better. Taking place in the US, that's a big deal for me. And also the fact that you're no longer restricted to running around in cities. Alright, the next game up is Far Cry 3. And I know that I was talking about this in a previous podcast about how I'm looking forward to it. It's one of the few games that I'm actually intending to purchase and buy. But I'm actually starting to feel a little bit uncertain about this title, especially after what they demoed at E3 this year. I am still going to play it though, but my problem with what I saw of Far Cry 3 at E3 was how the game feels like it's becoming more linear. And the open world design is kind of taking a back seat. Now, obviously, I don't know that it's actually getting more restrictive. They keep talking about how large of an area you have to explore. But the fact of the matter is, from what I saw, the missions felt very linear. They felt very scripted. And, that's a give and take. They're putting in a much better story, obviously, in comparison to how the story of Far Cry 2 ended up panning out, which was very, very dull and lackluster. But the point is, as they've demoed the game, they've focused on story-driven missions. And the feeling that I get from watching those missions is that the game is more linear. Now, like I said, I could be completely wrong. The game might be very, very open, but obviously the missions will be very linear, which will work out for the best, honestly, because the more linear your story, the better the story tends to be. But at the exact same time, it doesn't mean that the world or the game space that you play in has to be, corridor level design or anything. Kind of like your Rockstar games with Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption. Those games, the story was extremely linear, but you still had a very large world space to experience it in. But anyway, the other thing about Far Cry 3 is that, I don't know, I'm not exactly feeling the story that they've been pushing and the way that it goes. Basically, what I'm mostly concerned about is the fact that personal choice doesn't seem to factor in to what they've shown. It's kind of like they're not giving you an option to side with one group or the other, which is something that I've just kind of gotten used to, especially after playing through games like Fallout New Vegas and The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, where you have an option to side with, some sort of a faction. And in Far Cry 3, it just seems a whole lot like you're going to end up siding with the Islanders over the crazy guy who's trying to kill you, which, in all honesty, it makes sense because the crazy guy is trying to kill you. But anyway, the game is looking great. The gameplay definitely seems to be on spot, which is really what matters the most for me. I'm just concerned, from what I've seen, that what I'm really banking on for the game to be worthwhile for me might not be there. But at the same time, I don't know whether or not the game is becoming more linear and whether or not the story really is restrictive and it's not going to let you make choices. But anyway, in the end, my impressions from E3 for Far Cry 3 are looking good, but I'm starting to feel a little bit worried about it. Okay, now it's time to talk about Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. This game looks absolutely fantastic. Metal Gear Rising has been kind of in limbo for years on end, ever since the Metal Gear Solid 4 ended up coming out. I really don't understand why this game is having such a hard time getting off the ground. I know that one of the larger issues behind it for a while has been the fact that Hideo Kojima, the creator of the Metal Gear series, he hasn't wanted to move the development of the game outside of Japan, because, for those of you who don't know, Japan is the land of the sword. I mean, it defines a whole lot of their history and who they are. And naturally, it's just kind of a place that you don't go to say that, let's have an American company develop a game all about swords instead of a Japanese company. And, I'm completely understanding of why that is the case. But still, I'm puzzled as to why it's had such a hard time getting off the ground in Japan. You figure that a game so focused on blade play would have a fairly easy time getting itself together, especially under the direction of Hideo Kojima. But whatever the case, Metal Gear Rising definitely looks like it's shaping up, and it's a game that I'm very interested in playing because the Metal Gear series is something that I've got a real affinity for, and while at the same time I don't agree with how Hideo Kojima directs his games or delivers the story, namely the fact that he drops these enormously long cinemas on you and you're stuck just sitting there taking in story and not playing. And don't get me wrong, the cinemas are great, but God, I play a game to play. I do not play a game to watch a cinema. Games are games, not movies. And that's a major complaint that I have with Hideo Kojima. But that's neither here nor there, because I'll play it anyway just because I like the stories that he writes. But that's neither here nor there because I enjoy the Metal Gear stories, I enjoy the Metal Gear universe, and the cutting mechanics that they're putting into the game. Very hands-on, very gory. I've always enjoyed the idea of being to slice into people just as soon as I saw them demo this game several years ago. So Metal Gear Rising is a game that it's got my attention. I'm hyped for it. I'm ready for it to come out whenever that may be. Granted, they have not put a release date out for it yet, but nonetheless, I am already on board for this game. Alright, so now I think I'll talk about the game Zombie U, or Zombie, or however you want to say it. But anyway, this game is a Nintendo Wii U exclusive, and it makes use of the new tablet controller they've come up with. I'm definitely interested in it, seeing as how the title is going to be a launch game for the U. I'm probably going to purchase it just for the fact that it's probably going to be one of the titles that's more along the lines of hardcore. Hopefully it's better than Red Steel was for the Wii, because that was a title that I bought for the Wii when it came out, and it turned out to be a horrible game. I think it was also made by Ubisoft. But as far as Zombie U goes, I'm really interested to see how they work the inventory system and whatnot between the screen and the tablet screen. Hopefully, most of you have seen my video from Elements of Play about menus and how they work and how they should or should not be designed for games. And the thing is, in that video, one of the things that I stress is the fact that menus should not be these enormous clunky things that completely interrupt your gameplay and force you to, scroll through lists. Granted, there are certain types of games which require big clunky UI systems in order for you to sort through all of your items. Such games include, the Elder Scrolls and the Fallout games. But for the most part, games should not have big clunky inventory systems. And the thing about the Wii U is that, with that extra screen right in your hands, I think that it opens up an entirely new window for the way that you can develop your game around the idea of your menu never getting in the way. And that's one of the big things that I wanted to bring up in that video, the fact that the DS allows inventory management in a completely different way because there's an extra touch screen that can be completely dedicated to inventory management. And from the way that Zombie U handles inventory, from what I can see, it's fairly straightforward. You hit the pause button, which makes your character take his or her backpack off. But the catch is that the game doesn't pause. The zombies are still moving, they're still going to attack you, but the camera moves to a position where you can see around your character. But you have to look down at the tablet screen in order to manage your inventory. And, some games have tried to implement this in the past, the idea that pausing a game does not actually pause the action. And there's always been that problematic conflict of saying, well, okay, I can see my menu, but I can't see what is going on around me. And of course, I also covered the fact that having menus that don't pause the action are ridiculous because you have to run around to avoid taking damage and navigate menus at the same time. I brought that up in my menu video as well, the Castlevania Lament of Innocence. Great game, but God, navigating menus during combat was ridiculous. So the menu system and the inventory, just basically along those lines for Zombie U and for the Wii U in general, that's the number one thing that's driving this game forward to me. I want to see how they develop it, how they implement it. I am very interested in getting some hands-on experience with it. But at the exact same time, Zombie U is not a game that I think is going to make waves or big splash. I think it'll just be an interesting title that's going to be a first release for the Wii U. Hopefully it'll go over well. With any serious luck, it'll be something that everybody wants and everybody wants to play. But personally, I'm not overly interested in the game beyond the fact that it's going to be a launch title, which is going to give me my first experience with how the Wii U can potentially change inventory management for console gaming. Okay, next game up that you guys wanted to hear me talk about, that definitely caught my attention at the same time, was Beyond Two Souls. This game comes from the same director who created the Aquatic Dream video that was shown not too long ago, only a couple of months, I think. And he's also the same person who created Heavy Rain. Now, this kind of gets into a sticky subject for me, but the fact of the matter is that I don't think that he's making what you would call good interactive experiences. Very, very different interactive experiences is what I would call them. But the big problem with what I didn't like about Heavy Rain was the fact that it didn't really feel like I was playing an authentic game with real gameplay in it. I felt like I was more experiencing an interactive movie of sorts, and most of the experience was a bunch of quick time events, which is, I feel that quick time events are a way of trying to justify cinematic sequences in a video game. And for that reason, I hate quick time events, and it's the same reason why I felt that Heavy Rain wasn't that great of a game. That being said, different is not necessarily bad. What I am concerned about for Beyond Two Souls is that it's the exact same type of game, it just has a different story. Beyond that, though, the story is intriguing, that has my attention, and the visuals are absolutely top-notch. I'm very surprised by what they're still squeezing out of the PlayStation 3 this late in its console life, especially with how out of date the technology inside of that box is. But Beyond Two Souls, not a game I'm looking forward to, primarily because of how I didn't like Heavy Rain, and it's made by the same person. Okay, this game I think caught most people off guard. If they had more content to show, I think it may have been a show stealer, but unfortunately they only had a tiny amount of footage to show off. Star Wars 1313. For those of you who haven't seen any of it, the idea is that you play a bounty hunter and you are on the planet Coruscant, and what happens is you end up going down to level 1313. In the trailer, they describe it as, there's no fresh air down there, it's so far down. But you play as a bounty hunter and you go down there, and from the footage they showed off, it looks absolutely fantastic. If there's any way for me to properly describe it the way that I felt whenever I first saw it, I thought, wow, this is Star Wars meets Uncharted. And unfortunately for those of you who do not own a PlayStation 3, Uncharted has to be one of the best game series I've played of this generation for several different reasons. But the idea is that the climbing puzzles, the shooting mechanics, and the way that characters communicate between each other and converse, and the way they deliver the story, not so much through making you watch cinemas, but more so as you're playing the game. And moreover, the gameplay experience actually feels like you are playing a movie. It's difficult to describe, especially if you haven't experienced it before. But if Star Wars 1313 really does turn out to just hit the nail on the head of, feeling like Star Wars meets Uncharted, then I think that it's going to be a breakout hit. It's really difficult to draw any conclusions based on the small amount of footage that was shown at E3, but Star Wars 1313 is a game that has my attention. I'm looking for it. I'm going to keep my ear to the ground, because if they can follow up on the initial impressions that I had, then it's a game that shouldn't be overlooked. All right, we are closing in on the end of the list now, and this particular game is The Last of Us. Of all the titles that I knew were going to show up at E3, I thought that The Last of Us definitely would have had the most eyes on it. Much to my surprise, it wasn't the focus of the show. I'll get to why that was later, but this game is made by Naughty Dog, who are the same people that made the PlayStation 3 exclusive Uncharted, and The Last of Us is also a PlayStation 3 exclusive. Sorry, Xbox owners. Sorry, PC-only gamers. But, there's a really, really good reason for that, and it's the fact that the people at Naughty Dog, they put a lot of work into creating that game engine for the Uncharted series and souping it up and getting it to work just so perfectly with the PlayStation 3's cell-core processor. And, I don't want to go into the details here, but the processor for the PlayStation 3 is phenomenally hard to program for. And moreover, programming something to work extremely well on that processor means that the program is incapable of running on different hardware efficiently. To put it really simply, the processor in the PlayStation 3 has a unique architecture, and the way you program a game has a whole lot to do with how the processor processes instructions. And if the architecture is unique, then it means you have to create unique programming for it. And that's the exact reason why games that are made for the Xbox 360 look like crap whenever they're ported over to the PS3. And it's also the reason why today most games are made for the PS3 and then ported over to the 360, because it's a lot easier to scale things down. But in the case of what Naughty Dog did with the engine for Uncharted, and now the same engine is being used for The Last of Us, they've gotten it to work incredibly well with the cell-core processor, up to the point where porting it over would just be completely pointless because the game will look absolutely horrible, it wouldn't play right, etc., etc. But back to the point, The Last of Us looks absolutely phenomenal. This game has been on my map for a while now, mainly because it follows along with the same design that the Uncharted series had, the idea that you're getting your story through gameplay rather than through cutscenes. And that speaks volumes to me, because if I get the game's story while I am playing, it means that I'm getting story the way it should be delivered in a game, without taking the gameplay away from me to tell me something. Other things about the game is I really like the way that it mocks reality. They had a poster in the gameplay footage this year that made fun of Twilight. There's also the fact that I think it's got really, really great voice acting. The main character that you play as, I think his name is Joel, he sounds like he really is tired and he's stuck in this horrible scenario of, post-apocalyptic whatever. Also, the little girl, I'm not certain about it, but it sounds a whole lot like they got someone older to do a young girl's voice. She sounds just too old for me, but at the exact same time, that doesn't come across bad to me because of the scenario that she and Joel are in. Because, you get into a situation like that, you're probably going to grow up pretty fast, which is the reason why I don't have a problem with her voice, not the way she talks, but her voice and its pitch sounding a little bit too old for how young she is. But the voice acting is phenomenal. And also the combat feels really, really good. There's a lot of weight to the movements. Shooting people has a lot more value in it because of the lack of ammunition and whatnot. It's not like Call of Duty whenever you shoot someone and you see a spurt of blood and they just keep moving. Really, everything front to back on this game, it looks like it's hitting every last key perfect, and it's on target with everything that it's doing, everything that I've seen so far. Granted, I haven't actually played the game, so it's still too early for me to pass judgment on it, but from everything that I've seen so far, The Last of Us is a game that has me sold. I am ready to buy it the day it comes out. And for all of these reasons, I thought for certain that The Last of Us would be the game that would take the show. It would be the big focus of E3. Until I, like many other people, saw this next game. Watch Dogs. Now, I didn't see this title coming at all. It looks phenomenal. I was not introduced to this game like most other games out of E3. I was introduced to it by watching the Ubisoft press conference. And the way that they introduced it during the press conference, you can't actually see this introduction in any of the trailers, but they introduced it with a typographic conspiracy video. And I love that type of entertainment. It basically sets the entire concept of the game up and the political nature and what's going on in the world, and more or less what you can do, your powers or capabilities in the game. And another thing about Watch Dogs is that, to me, it feels very Ubisoft, like a mix between Grand Theft Auto and Assassin's Creed. Obviously, from just watching the gameplay, you play as an agent who focuses on using subterfuge to get in close to their target, but then lets all hell break loose whenever it's time to kill that target. Moreover, you have special skills to cause all sorts of trouble and get your job done. Very similar to Assassin's Creed. In Assassin's Creed, you blend into your surroundings, you don't let other people see you, and then all of a sudden, bam, you strike. Well, it's the same idea in Watch Dogs, except instead of walking around in Rome or Venice or Florence and blending into the crowd and then striking, you are walking around in a modern city, and then you are hacking things in order to get your job done. In the video, the main character hacks a street light in order to cause his target to get into a car accident so he's easier to take out. Now, the other thing worth mentioning is that the Watch Dogs demo had two different endings to it. There's the ending that was in the press conference, and then there was the ending to the video that was published to everyone else. And the second one is probably what you've seen, where the agent who was after the target gets into a car and drives away and escapes. But the one that I saw, the first one that I saw at the press conference, it ended with the camera pulling back to another agent standing up on a roof, talking with someone else over his cell phone. Now, some people say that this is an indication of some sort of a multiplayer component that's going to be packaged in with the game. I think that that's a gap that's a little bit too far to bridge. Personally, whenever I was watching the game, and more critically, you see that ending after you see the large typographic introduction to the actual the world space and the political climate and whatnot. So that ending where it pulls out to another agent and then it pulls out again to kind of a wireframe of the city, and you see markers for several agents, I don't think that speaks so much to a multiplayer component as much as it does saying that the game isn't just about one person. It's about a larger overarching story that involves several different agents, and the story can very easily be about controlling multiple different people to get the full story. That being said, I won't discount the possibility for a multiplayer component. Most companies seem to think that it's a necessary thing to package in with every game that they sell today, something that I'm quite at odds with. But nonetheless, Personally, I think that the original way that the Watch Dogs trailer ended speaks to the fact that the story is much larger and it's more about conspiracy than it is about the adventure of one man. Take that as you will, but that's just how I interpret it. Okay, everyone, that's all the games that I'm going to cover this time around. For any of you who are upset that I didn't cover any games that were Xbox exclusives, I have a very good explanation for that. I don't own an Xbox. After having gone through 3 of them, I gave up on the console, so that's just what it is. I don't play Gears of War, I don't play the Halo series, I just don't care about pretty much anything that's exclusive to the Xbox for the sole reason that I tried with the console, and after having 3 systems die on me, I just don't care anymore. Sorry to say, but that's just how it is for me. Anyways, that's all that I have to say about E3 this year, my comments on various games that came out of the show. I'll see you guys later, and the first episode of Elements of Play that I have to put up will probably go up sometime on Monday. Anyways, this is William Strife, signing out.